The woman who stumbled into Steins Pass, New Mexico territory in the autumn of 1878, looked like she had been running from the devil himself, and perhaps she had been. Juniper Reeves collapsed against the wooden post outside the general store, her dress torn and dusty, her dark hair falling in tangled waves around a face marked by exhaustion and something deeper than mere physical fatigue. Her green eyes darted constantly, scanning every corner, every shadow, every face that passed. Even as her body begged for rest, those eyes remained alert, watchful, unable to surrender to the peace that ordinary people took for granted. The shopkeeper's wife, Mrs. Henderson, rushed out with water and concern, but Juniper flinched at the touch, her hand moving instinctively to the small pistol hidden in the folds of her skirt. Only when she recognized kindness, rather than threat, did her fingers relax, though they never moved far from that weapon. "Lord have mercy, child, what happened to you?" Mrs. Henderson asked, her weathered face creased with worry. Juniper's throat was too dry for words at first. She drank the water greedily, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "How far is the next town?" she asked instead of answering, her voice hoarse from days of sparse water and constant fear. "Silver City is about 40 miles northwest." "You running from something?" "Always," Juniper whispered, and there was such weariness in that single word that Mrs. Henderson felt it in her bones. The older woman helped Juniper inside, where the dim interior of the store provided some shelter from the harsh afternoon sun. Steins Pass was little more than a scattered collection of buildings along the Southern Pacific Railroad route, a place where people stopped briefly before moving on to somewhere else. It suited Juniper perfectly. Anywhere she could disappear suited her. "There is a boarding house 2 buildings down," Mrs. Henderson said. "Mrs. Carlton keeps clean rooms. You look like you could use a bed." Juniper's jaw tightened. A bed meant lying down. Lying down meant vulnerability. Sleep meant losing awareness of her surroundings. She had not slept properly in 3 years, not since the night her father's gambling debts had been called in by men who took payment in blood and terror. They had killed her father, killed her younger brother who had tried to defend him, and told Juniper that she belonged to them now. She had run that very night, stealing a horse and riding until the animal collapsed beneath her. Since then, she had been moving, always moving, catching brief moments of rest but never true sleep, never allowing herself to slip into that deep unconsciousness where nightmares and reality blurred together. The men hunting her were relentless. She had killed one of them in Kansas City when he had cornered her in an alley. She had put a bullet in another's leg in Santa Fe. But there were always more, and their leader, a cruel man named Silas Corrigan, had sworn he would have her, one way or another. Dead or alive, she was his property, he claimed, payment for her father's debts. "I do not have much money," Juniper said quietly. "Mrs. Carlton is understanding. Work it off if you need to. We are good people here, most of us anyway." Juniper wanted to believe that good people existed, but experience had taught her otherwise. Still, her body was failing her. She had been walking for 2 days since her horse had gone lame, and she had been forced to shoot it to end its suffering. The autumn heat of the New Mexico territory was unforgiving, and she knew she would not make it much further without rest. "Thank you," she managed, and meant it. Mrs. Henderson walked her to the boarding house, a 2-story structure that had seen better days but stood solid against the desert landscape. Mrs. Carlton, a stern-faced woman with kind eyes, took one look at Juniper and asked no questions, simply showing her to a small room on the 2nd floor with a window overlooking the main street. "Supper is at 6, Mrs. Carlton said. "Water for washing is in the basin. Lock your door if it makes you feel safer." Juniper did lock the door, and she wedged the single chair in the room under the handle for good measure. Then she moved to the window, checking sight lines, escape routes, how far the drop would be if she needed to jump. Only when she had mapped every possible danger and exit did she allow herself to sit on the edge of the narrow bed. Her hands trembled as the adrenaline that had kept her moving began to fade. She wanted to sleep. God, how she wanted to sleep. But the moment she closed her eyes fully, she saw her brother's face, heard her father's last gasping breath, felt Sela's Corrigan's hand gripping her arm as she fought to get away. Her eyes snapped open, her heart racing, and she stood again, pacing the small room like a caged animal. This was her life now. This half-existence between waking and sleeping, always aware, always ready to run. She did not go down for supper. Instead, she sat by the window as darkness fell over Steins Pass, watching the few lanterns that illuminated the street, tracking every person who walked by. Around midnight, exhaustion pulled at her so heavily that her head nodded forward, and for perhaps 20 minutes, she dozed in the chair, her body finally overriding her will. But the creak of a floorboard in the hallway sent her jolting awake, pistol in hand, heart hammering against her ribs. It was only another boarder returning to their room, but the damage was done. She was awake again, alert again, trapped in this prison of her own fear. The pattern continued for 3 days. Juniper ventured out only for brief necessities, buying a bit of bread and dried meat with her dwindling coins, refilling her canteen at the public pump. She spoke to no one beyond what was required for transactions. Sleep remained elusive, snatched in tiny increments that left her feeling more drained than rested. Dark circles deepened under her eyes. Her hands shook more often. She knew she could not continue like this much longer, but she did not know how to stop. On the 4th morning, Mrs. Carlton knocked on her door. "Miss Reeves, there is someone downstairs who helps folks who need it. Might be worth talking to him." Juniper's first instinct was refusal, but something in Mrs. Carlton's tone made her pause. "What kind of help?" "The kind you look like you need. Protection. Safety." "He is a good man, probably the best I have known. Name is Benjamin Grant." The name meant nothing to Juniper, but she was desperate enough to be curious. She opened the door carefully, peering out to find Mrs. Carlton alone in the hallway. "He is not going to hurt you," the older woman said gently. "But he has a way of solving problems that seem impossible." 10 minutes later, Juniper descended the stairs, one hand on the pistol hidden in her skirt pocket, every muscle tensed for flight. The main sitting room of the boarding house was empty except for one man who stood looking out the front window, and Juniper stopped on the bottom step, momentarily struck still by the sight of him. Benjamin Grant was unlike anyone she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders straining against the fabric of a worn buckskin shirt. His arms were thick with muscle, the kind that came from years of hard labor and harder living. His hair was dark brown, falling past his shoulders in waves that he had tied back loosely with a strip of leather. A full beard covered his jaw, but it was well kept, not wild. When he turned at the sound of her footstep, his eyes were a striking blue-gray, the color of mountain sky before a storm, and they held a steadiness that made her breath catch. He looked like he had been carved from the mountains themselves, all solid strength and unshakable presence. There was a rifle leaned against the wall near him, and a large knife hung from his belt, but he made no move toward either weapon. He simply looked at her with those calm eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, Juniper felt something shift in her chest, some small crack in the armor she had built around herself. "Miss Reeves," he said, and his voice was deep, quiet, the kind of voice that did not need to be raised to command attention. Mrs. Carlton tells me you might be in need of someone to watch your back. Juniper's throat felt tight. She wanted to deny it, to insist she could handle everything herself, but the exhaustion was eating her alive from the inside out. I do not have money to pay for that kind of help. Did not ask about money, Benjamin said simply. He moved slowly, deliberately, crossing to one of the sitting room chairs and settling his large frame into it. The chair creaked under his weight. Sit if you want. Tell me what is chasing you or do not. Either way, you look like you have not slept in a month. 3 years, Juniper said before she could stop herself. The admission surprised her, but there was something about this man that made her want to be honest. I have not slept properly in 3 years. Benjamin's expression did not change, but something in his eyes softened. That is a long time to be running. I do not have a choice. Everyone has choices. Sometimes they are all bad ones, but they exist. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, his hands clasped loosely. I live up in the mountains about 15 miles north of here. Place is defensible, isolated, and I know every approach for miles around. If someone is hunting you, they would have a hell of a time finding you there, and an even worse time getting to you if they did. Juniper stared at him, trying to understand what he was offering and why. You do not even know me. Why would you help? Because you need it, Benjamin said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Because I have spent the last 5 years living alone up there, and I know what it is like to carry weight that never gets lighter. Because Mrs. Carlton asked me to, and she is one of the few people whose judgment I trust completely. He paused. And because when I look at you, I see someone fighting with everything they have just to survive another day. That kind of strength deserves support, not abandonment. Tears burned behind Juniper's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had not cried since the night her family died, had not allowed herself that luxury when every moment required vigilance. There are men looking for me, dangerous men. If they find me at your place, they will kill you to get to me. They can try, Benjamin said, and there was no arrogance in his tone, just flat certainty. I have survived worse than whatever is coming for you. I was a scout for the Army for 8 years, tracked Apache war parties through terrain that would kill most men, fought in conflicts that do not have names because the government pretends they never happened. I know how to handle trouble. Juniper wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe that someone could actually keep her safe, that she could finally close her eyes without fear of never opening them again. But trust was a luxury she had abandoned long ago. I need to think about it, she said quietly. Benjamin nodded, rising from the chair with easy grace despite his size. Fair enough. I will be in town until tomorrow morning. Mrs. Henderson at the general store knows how to reach me if you decide you want help. But Miss Reeves, he paused at the door, looking back at her with those steady eyes. You cannot keep going the way you are. Your body will give out, or your mind will, or you will make a mistake because you are too tired to think straight. Eventually, running stops working. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and Juniper was alone again with her fear and her exhaustion, and the faint, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, there was another way. She spent the rest of the day wrestling with the decision. Every logical part of her brain screamed that trusting a stranger was suicide, that Benjamin Grant could be working for Silas Corrigan, that this whole thing could be an elaborate trap. But her gut, that deep instinct that had kept her alive through 3 years of running, whispered something different. It said that Benjamin was exactly what he appeared to be. A man who understood what it meant to be hunted, to be alone, to need sanctuary. By evening, Juniper had made her choice. She walked to the general store just before closing, finding Benjamin inside purchasing supplies, his large frame making the cramped aisles seem even smaller. "I will come with you," she said without preamble. "But I keep my weapons, and if I feel unsafe for any reason, I leave." No questions, no arguments. Benjamin turned, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth beneath his beard. "Agreed. We leave at dawn. Bring whatever you have, though I have most things you will need up at the cabin." That night, Juniper packed her few possessions into a worn canvas bag and tried to rest, knowing she would need whatever strength she could muster for the journey. She managed perhaps an hour of fitful dozing before dawn light began creeping through her window. When she went downstairs, Benjamin was already waiting, 2 horses saddled and ready outside. "The gray mare is for you," he said. "Her name is Silver. She is steady and sure-footed in mountain terrain." Juniper approached the horse cautiously, but Silver stood calm and patient as she mounted. Benjamin swung up onto his own horse, a large buckskin gelding that looked like the only animal capable of carrying his substantial frame, and they set out from Steins Pass, as the sun painted the eastern sky in shades of gold and pink. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they traveled north, leaving behind the flat desert for rolling hills that gave way to steeper slopes and scattered pine forests. Benjamin led them along paths that were barely visible, routes that only someone intimately familiar with the land would know. He rode with constant awareness, his eyes scanning the landscape, reading signs in broken branches and disturbed soil that Juniper could not interpret. Yet despite his vigilance, he seemed utterly at ease in this wilderness, as if the mountains were his natural habitat. They stopped once to rest the horses and drink from a clear stream that tumbled down over smooth rocks. Benjamin handed Juniper strips of dried venison and hardtack, which she ate mechanically, her body needing fuel even if her nervous stomach protested. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked, breaking the silence that had characterized most of their journey. "5 years, give or take," Benjamin replied, refilling his canteen. "After I left the army, I tried living in towns for a while. Santa Fe, Tucson, even made it to Denver once. Could not do it. Too many people, too much noise, too many reminders of things I wanted to forget. The mountains do not ask questions or expect you to be something you are not." "What are you trying to forget?" Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "The things I did in the name of duty. The people I killed who probably did not deserve it. The orders I followed because I was young and stupid and thought the men giving them knew better than me." He looked at her directly. "We all have ghosts, Miss Reeves. Mine just happened to wear army uniforms in my dreams." Juniper understood that. She carried her own ghosts, her own burden of violence and loss. Perhaps that was why she felt this strange connection to this man she barely knew, this mountain man who seemed to carry the weight of the world on those broad shoulders without buckling under it. They continued on, climbing higher into the mountains where the air grew thinner and cooler, where pine trees grew thick, and the sound of human civilization faded to nothing. Finally, as afternoon stretched toward evening, Benjamin led them off the faint trail they had been following and through a narrow gap between 2 massive boulders. Beyond lay a small valley, sheltered on 3 sides by steep rocky slopes, with a clear stream running through its center and a sturdy log cabin built against the northern cliff face. It was one of the most beautiful and isolated places Juniper had ever seen. The cabin was larger than she had expected, well constructed with a stone chimney and a covered porch. A small barn stood nearby, along with what looked like a smokehouse and a root cellar built into the hillside. A vegetable garden, mostly harvested for the season, showed signs of careful tending. This was not just a shelter but a home, built with skill and maintained with care. "Welcome to my piece of the world," Benjamin said, dismounting. such as it is." He helped Juniper down from her horse, his hands steady on her waist, and she felt the strength in his grip, the calluses on his palms from work and weapons. He released her quickly, respectfully, and led both horses to the barn. Juniper stood in the center of the small valley, turning slowly to take it all in. She could see what Benjamin meant about it being defensible. Anyone approaching would have to come through that narrow gap or attempt the steep slopes, both of which would give ample warning. The cabin itself was positioned with clear sight lines in all directions. This was a place built by someone who understood threat and how to mitigate it. Inside, the cabin was sparse but comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a sturdy table and chairs nearby. Shelves held books, tools, and supplies. A cooking area occupied one corner, well stocked with hanging herbs and preserved foods. 2 doors led to what Juniper assumed were bedrooms. "You take the room on the right," Benjamin said, bringing her bag inside. "It has a good window and a door that bolts from the inside. I will take the other one. Privy is out back, fresh water from the stream. Make yourself at home as much as you can." Juniper entered the room he had indicated and found it simple but clean. A bed with what looked like a relatively new mattress and warm blankets. A small dresser. A chair by the window. Most importantly, the door did indeed have a heavy bolt, and the window had shutters that could be secured. But as she stood there, looking around this room that Benjamin had offered her without question or expectation of payment, something inside her chest felt painfully tight. She had been alone for so long, trusting no one, relying only on herself. Now this stranger was offering her sanctuary, and she did not know how to accept it without fear that it would be taken away. That night, Benjamin cooked a simple meal of rabbit stew with vegetables from his garden, and they ate in companionable silence at the table. Juniper found herself studying him in the firelight, watching the way he moved with such certainty despite his size, the way his hands were gentle with the dishes despite their obvious strength. He was a study in contrasts, this mountain man, hard and soft in equal measure. "You should sleep," Benjamin said eventually. "Real sleep if you can manage it." "I do not know if I can," Juniper admitted. "Every time I close my eyes I see them coming for me." Benjamin nodded slowly. "Then do not close your eyes, not yet, but rest your body, lie down, let yourself be still. I will sit out here and keep watch. Nothing is getting past me tonight, I promise you that. You need to sleep too." "I am used to light sleeping. Army trained. I can catch what I need in short bursts." He met her eyes across the table. "But you, Miss Reeves, you are running on empty. Your body needs more than the cat naps you have been surviving on. So go lie down, leave your door open if it helps you feel safer, and know that I am here. I am awake. I am watching. Nothing will touch you tonight." There was such conviction in his voice that Juniper found herself believing him. She stood on unsteady legs and moved to her room, leaving the door ajar as he had suggested. She lay down on the bed fully clothed, her pistol within reach, and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of Benjamin moving around the main room, stoking the fire, settling into what she imagined was a chair positioned to watch the door. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The exhaustion was overwhelming, pulling at her like weights tied to her limbs, but her eyes would not stay closed. Every time they drifted shut, panic spiked through her and they flew open again. Then Benjamin's voice, quiet from the main room. "I am here, Miss Reeves, still here, still watching." Something about hearing his voice, that deep, steady rumble, eased the panic slightly. Her eyes closed, opened, closed again. "Still here," Benjamin said again after a few more minutes, as if he could sense her struggle. "Not going anywhere, you are safe." Juniper's breathing slowed. Her eyes stayed closed a bit longer this time. The darkness behind her eyelids was not quite as terrifying when she knew Benjamin Grant was on the other side of that open door. This man who looked like he could fight off an army single-handedly, and probably had at some point in his past. "Still here," he repeated, his voice becoming a rhythm, a tether to consciousness that paradoxically allowed her to loosen her grip on it. "Sleep, Juniper, I have got you. Nothing is getting through me." And finally, for the first time in 3 years, Juniper Reeves allowed herself to drift into real sleep, the kind that went deeper than the shallow surface dozing she had survived on. Her body finally accepted what her mind had been resisting, that she was, in this moment, in this place, with this man standing guard, truly safe. Benjamin kept his word. He sat in the chair by the fireplace throughout the night, his rifle across his lap, his eyes on the door and the windows, listening to every sound the mountains made. He heard Juniper's breathing deepen and even out, heard the small sounds of someone finally resting, and he felt a fierce protectiveness rise in his chest that surprised him with its intensity. He had meant what he said to Mrs. Carleton. He had been alone in these mountains for 5 years, speaking to people only when he came down to Steins Pass for supplies every few months. He had chosen isolation because it was easier than dealing with the memories that crowded his head when he was around too many people, the ghosts of the men he had killed, the women and children he had not been able to save, the orders he had followed that sat heavy on his conscience. But looking at Juniper Reeves, seeing the exhaustion and fear that she carried like a second skin, something had awakened in him that he thought had died in the desert outside of Apache Pass 8 years ago. The desire to protect, to shelter, to stand between something fragile and the world that wanted to destroy it. So he watched. And when dawn came, painting the sky beyond the windows in brilliant orange and pink, he was still there, still awake, still guarding the woman who slept in the room beyond. Juniper woke slowly, confused at first by the unfamiliar surroundings, then confused by the fact that she felt rested, that her body did not ache with the bone-deep weariness that had become her constant companion. Pale morning light filtered through the window, and she could hear movement in the main room, the sounds of someone building up a fire and setting a kettle on to boil. She sat up carefully, half expecting the panic to return, but it remained at bay, a distant thing rather than the constant scream it usually was. She had slept, truly slept. The realization brought tears to her eyes, and this time she let them fall, silent tracks down her cheeks that released some of the pressure that had been building in her chest for 3 years. After a few minutes, she wiped her face, stood, and walked to the main room. Benjamin was at the fireplace, and he turned when he heard her, his eyes quickly assessing her state. "Morning," he said simply. "Coffee is almost ready. How did you sleep?" "I slept," Juniper said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "I actually slept." A small smile tugged at Benjamin's mouth. "Good, that is good. Did you sleep at all?" "Enough," he said, which was not really an answer. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. "I thought we could spend today getting you familiar with the place, showing you where everything is, how things work. If you are going to stay here for a while, you should know the land." Juniper wrapped her hands around the warm cup, letting the heat seep into her palms. "How long can I stay?" "As long as you need, as long as you want." Benjamin's voice was matter-of-fact, as if offering indefinite sanctuary to a stranger was perfectly normal. "I meant what I said yesterday. This place is defensible and I am here. You are welcome to stay until you feel safe enough to leave, or until whatever is chasing you is no longer a threat." "That might be never," Juniper said quietly. "Silas Corrigan does not give up. He sees it as a matter of pride now. He will keep coming until I am dead or his." Then I guess he is in for a disappointment, Benjamin said calmly, because neither of those things is going to happen. They spent the day as Benjamin had suggested, with him showing her around the property. He explained his water system, how he had redirected part of the stream to run close to the cabin for easy access. He showed her his stores of food in the root cellar, enough to last through a hard winter and then some. The barn held not just the 2 horses, but also 3 goats that provided milk and cheese, and a dozen chickens that scratched in a protected run. "You are completely self-sufficient up here," Juniper observed as they walked the perimeter of the small valley. "That is the idea," Benjamin said. "I do not like depending on other people if I can help it. Means I only have to go down to Steins Pass every few months for things I cannot make or grow myself. Salt, coffee, ammunition, books if there are any new ones. Otherwise, I have everything I need right here. It must get lonely." Benjamin was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the tree line out of habit. Sometimes, but loneliness felt safer than the alternative. "What changed? Why did you agree to bring me up here?" He stopped walking, turning to look at her fully. "Because I have been alone long enough that I forgot what it felt like to give a damn about someone else. And when I saw you in that boarding house, looking like you were about to shatter into 1,000 pieces, but still holding yourself together through sheer will, I remembered. I remembered what it felt like to want to help, to protect. It felt like waking up after a long sleep." Juniper's breath caught. No one had spoken to her like this in years, with such plain honesty and no expectation of anything in return. "I do not know what to say. Do not have to say anything. Just let me help. Let yourself rest and heal and stop running for a while." Benjamin started walking again, his long strides eating up the ground. "Come on, I want to show you something." He led her up a narrow path that climbed the eastern slope of the valley, moving with the sure-footedness of someone who had walked this route 1,000 times. Juniper followed, her breathing labored in the thin mountain air until they reached a small plateau about halfway up the slope. From there, the view was breathtaking. The valley spread below them, the mountains rolling away in all directions, pine forests giving way to rocky peaks that touched the sky. "This is my thinking spot," Benjamin said, settling onto a flat boulder that was still warm from the morning sun. "When things get too loud in my head, I come up here and remind myself how big the world is, how small my problems are in comparison." Juniper sat beside him, careful to leave space between them, though she found herself wanting to move closer to his solid warmth. "Your problems do not seem small. The things you have seen, the things you have done, those are not small. Maybe not. But looking at all this," he gestured to the vast landscape before them, "it puts things in perspective. The world keeps turning no matter what I have done or not done. The sun keeps rising. The mountains keep standing. Life keeps happening whether I am tortured by my past or not. That does not make the guilt go away, but it makes it bearable." They sat in silence for a while, the wind moving through the pine trees below them, the distant cry of a hawk echoing off the rocks. Juniper felt something loosening in her chest, some of the constant tension that kept her muscles tight and her jaw clenched. The beauty of this place, the quiet strength of the man beside her, the simple fact of having slept deeply for the first time in years, all of it combined to create a moment of peace that felt almost foreign. "Thank you," she said softly. "For this, for all of it." Benjamin looked at her, and in the bright mountain sunlight, his blue-gray eyes were clear and kind. "You are welcome. And Juniper, I want you to know something. I am not doing this because I expect anything from you. Not gratitude, not companionship, not anything else. I am doing it because it is the right thing to do and because I want to. So you do not need to thank me, and you do not need to feel like you owe me. You are here because you need to be, and that is enough. Juniper felt tears threatening again, but she blinked them back. I have been alone for so long. I had forgotten that good people existed. I do not know about good, Benjamin said with a slight grimace, but I try to do better than I did yesterday. That is about all any of us can manage. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Benjamin kept watch at night, allowing Juniper to sleep, truly sleep, for 8 or 9 hours at a stretch. Her body, starved for rest, drank it in greedily, and she could feel herself growing stronger, more alert during the day as the fog of exhaustion finally began to lift. During the daytime, she helped Benjamin with the daily tasks of maintaining his mountain homestead. She learned to milk the goats, collect eggs from the chickens, tend the last of the autumn garden. He taught her to fish in the stream using methods that seemed almost effortlessly effective in his large, capable hands. She helped him chop and stack wood for the coming winter, marveling at the way he could split logs with a few powerful swings of his axe, his muscles flexing under the fabric of his shirt. They talked as they worked, sharing pieces of their pasts in careful increments. Juniper told him about her father, a good man who had fallen into gambling when his business failed, who had spiraled into debt despite her and her brother's attempts to help. She told him about the night Silas Corrigan's men came, about the gunshots and the blood and her desperate flight into the darkness. Benjamin told her about growing up in Missouri, about joining the army at 17 to escape poverty, about the campaigns against the Apache where he learned to track and fight and survive in the harshest conditions. He told her about the orders he had been given to relocate peaceful villages, about the women and children caught in crossfire, about the slow death of his idealism until he could not look at himself in the mirror anymore and had walked away. "How did you get away from the army?" Juniper asked one afternoon as they worked together to repair a section of fence around the chicken run. "I thought they did not just let you leave." "They do not," Benjamin said, hammering a nail with precise strikes. "I deserted, walked away in the middle of the night and did not look back. Figured they would send someone after me eventually, but they never did. Either they had bigger concerns, or whoever was supposed to track deserters decided I was not worth the effort. Were you not afraid of being caught, terrified?" "Spent the first year jumping at every sound, sure the army was right behind me. But after a while, I realized they had forgotten about me, or did not care. Just another soldier who could not handle what they had seen and done. I built this place, made a life, and stopped looking over my shoulder." He glanced at her. "That is what I want for you too, to stop looking over your shoulder, to feel safe enough to build something." Juniper wanted that more than she could express. As the days turned into weeks, she felt herself softening in ways she had not thought possible. The constant vigilance that had defined her existence began to ease, replaced by a growing sense that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where Silas Corrigan's reach could not find her. But more than the physical safety, she found herself drawn to Benjamin in ways that both frightened and exhilarated her. She watched the way he moved through the world with such confidence and competence, the way he was gentle with the animals and patient with her when she struggled to learn new skills. She saw how he kept his word, sitting up night after night so she could sleep, never once complaining or suggesting it was too much trouble. And she noticed the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, a softness in those blue-gray eyes that made her heart beat faster. One evening, about a month after she had arrived, they sat on the porch together watching the sun set behind the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The autumn air was growing colder, hinting at the winter to come, and Benjamin had wrapped a blanket around Juniper's shoulders to ward off the chill. "I have been thinking," Juniper said carefully, about what happens when Silas finds me, because he will eventually. He is relentless. Benjamin's jaw tightened. If he finds you, he will have to go through me, and I promise you that will not be easy for him. I do not want you to get hurt because of me. You have done so much already. Juniper. Benjamin turned to face her fully, and in the fading light, his expression was fierce. I have not felt this alive in 5 years. For half a decade, I have been existing, not living, just going through motions in this beautiful place I built for myself. Then you showed up, and suddenly I remember what it feels like to have something worth protecting. Someone worth protecting. So no, I am not going to step aside if trouble comes. I am going to do what I should have done more often when I was a young soldier following bad orders. I am going to stand for something that matters. Juniper's throat felt tight. What if I am not worth it? What if I am just some broken woman running from debts her father left behind? You are not broken, Benjamin said firmly. You are bent, maybe, worn down, but not broken. And as for those debts, they died with your father. You do not owe Silas Corrigan a damn thing, and he has no right to hunt you. That is not justice. That is just cruelty dressed up in false legitimacy. He killed my brother, Juniper whispered. Shot him in front of me when he tried to fight back. My brother was only 17. He had his whole life ahead of him. Benjamin's hand moved to cover hers where it rested on the arm of her chair, his palm warm and rough with calluses. I am sorry, sorrier than I can say, but that is on Corrigan, not on you. You survived. You fought. You kept going when most people would have given up. That takes strength most people do not have. Juniper turned her hand over beneath his, threading their fingers together, and the gesture felt monumental. A connection she had not allowed herself to make with another person since the night her world fell apart. Benjamin's fingers closed gently around hers, and they sat like that as full darkness fell, the stars beginning to emerge overhead in a glittering display impossible to see in any town or city. I do not know how to do this, Juniper said quietly. How to trust, how to let someone in. I have been alone so long I do not remember what it is like to rely on anyone. We will figure it out together, Benjamin said. No rush, no expectations. Just two people who understand what it is like to carry weight that never quite lightens, trying to make each other's burden a little easier. That night, Juniper slept more deeply than ever, and for the first time, she dreamed not of blood and death and flight, but of strong arms and mountain valleys and the possibility that maybe home was not a place but a person. Winter arrived with the first snowfall in late November, transforming Benjamin's valley into a world of white silence. The narrow gap that served as the primary entrance became even more defensible, and the cabin's thick walls and well-built fireplace kept the cold at bay. Juniper and Benjamin settled into the isolated rhythm of winter mountain life. Days spent maintaining the homestead and keeping warm, evenings spent by the fire with books or quiet conversation. Juniper continued to improve, the shadows under her eyes fading, her hands growing steadier, her smiles coming more frequently. She had gained back the weight she had lost during her years of running, and color had returned to her cheeks. More importantly, the constant fear that had haunted her began to recede, replaced by a cautious hope that perhaps she had finally found a place where she could breathe. Benjamin watched these changes with quiet satisfaction, though he tried not to let his growing feelings show too obviously. He had not expected to care for her the way he did, had not anticipated that having her in his space would feel so natural, so right. He loved the sound of her laugh when he said something unexpectedly dry, loved watching her gain confidence in her skills, loved the way she would absently hum while working on some task. But he kept his distance, afraid of pushing too hard or too fast, afraid that his growing affection would frighten her away. So he continued to stand watch at night, continued to keep their interactions respectful and careful, even as every instinct he had screamed at him to pull her close and promise her the world. It was Juniper who finally broke the careful distance between them. One evening in early December, when the snow was falling thick and soft outside and the fire crackled warmly in the hearth, she emerged from her room wearing one of his shirts, which fell nearly to her knees, her hair loose around her shoulders. Benjamin looked up from the rifle he was cleaning, and his breath caught at the sight of her. "I do not want to sleep alone tonight," she said quietly, and there was no seduction in her voice, just honest vulnerability. "Not in that way necessarily. I just do not want to be alone. I want to be near you." Benjamin set down the rifle carefully, his heart hammering in his chest. "You can stay out here by the fire with me like you have been. I do not mind." "No," Juniper said, moving closer. "I mean I want to actually be near you. I want to fall asleep knowing you are right there. I am tired of being afraid, tired of keeping everyone at arm's length. I trust you, Benjamin. I trust you more than I have trusted anyone in my entire life." Benjamin stood slowly, acutely aware of his size, of how he could be intimidating without intending to be. "Juniper, I do not want you to feel like you have to do this. You do not owe me anything." "I know," she said, and she closed the distance between them, placing her palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. "This is not about owing. This is about wanting. I want to be close to you. I want to stop pretending I do not feel something every time you look at me. I want to stop acting like my heart does not race when you say my name." Benjamin's hand came up to cover hers against his chest. "I feel the same way," he admitted, his voice rough. "Have since the day I met you. But I did not want to push, did not want to make you uncomfortable when you were just trying to heal." "I have healed enough to know what I want," Juniper said, looking up at him with clear green eyes. "And what I want is you, this, us." Benjamin made a low sound in the back of his throat, and very carefully, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, he cupped her face in his large hands and bent to kiss her. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question more than a demand. But when Juniper pressed closer, her arms winding around his neck, Benjamin deepened the kiss, pouring into it all the feelings he had been holding back for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Juniper smiled up at him. "That was worth waiting for." Benjamin laughed, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. "You have no idea how long I have wanted to do that." "Show me," Juniper said, taking his hand and leading him toward his room, the one he had occupied alone for 5 years. "Show me how you have wanted me." That night, they came together with a tenderness that surprised them both. Benjamin was careful with his strength, reverent in his touch, treating Juniper like she was precious and fragile even as she demonstrated she was anything but. And Juniper, for the first time since her world fell apart, allowed herself to be vulnerable, to surrender control, to trust that the man holding her would keep her safe even in her most unguarded moments. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Juniper rested her head on Benjamin's broad chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart beneath her ear. His arm was wrapped around her, holding her close, and she felt safer than she had ever felt in her life. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I do not know when it happened, but I love you." Benjamin's arm tightened around her. "I love you too. Have since that first day, I think, though I did not recognize it at first. You walked into that boarding house looking like a wild thing ready to fight the whole world, and I thought to myself that I would gladly take on that fight with you." Juniper smiled against his skin. "We are quite a pair, are we not? Two broken people trying to fix each other." "Maybe not fix," Benjamin said thoughtfully. maybe just holding each other together while the broken pieces heal on their own. Juniper fell asleep in his arms that night, deeply and peacefully, and Benjamin kept his vigil still, but now it felt different. Before, he had been guarding a woman who needed protection. Now he was watching over the woman he loved, and that made all the difference. Winter deepened, and they became a unit, working and living and loving in their isolated mountain sanctuary. Benjamin taught Juniper to shoot properly. Hours spent in the cold practicing until she could hit targets with reliable accuracy. He taught her to track, to read signs in the snow, to move quietly through the forest. And Juniper, in turn, taught Benjamin to open up, to talk about the things that haunted him, to forgive himself for choices made by a younger man following orders in a complicated world. Christmas came and went, celebrated simply with a special meal and a gift Benjamin had carved for her. A small wooden figure of a bird in flight that was so detailed Juniper could see individual feathers. She gave him a shirt she had sewn from fabric she found in his stores, painstakingly fitted to his large frame, and the look on his face when he saw it made her heart swell. "No one has made me something in over a decade," he said quietly, running his fingers over the careful stitching. "Thank you." But even as they built their life together, both knew that the peace could not last forever. Silas Corrigan was still out there, still hunting, and eventually he would follow Juniper's trail to Steins Pass. It was only a matter of time. The reckoning came in late February, when the snow was beginning to melt, but winter still held the mountains in its grip. Benjamin had gone down to Steins Pass for supplies, leaving Juniper at the cabin with strict instructions to keep the doors barred and her weapons close. He had been uneasy about leaving her, but they were running low on coffee and ammunition, and it was a trip that could not be delayed. He should have trusted his instincts. When Benjamin returned 2 days later, riding hard up the mountain trail, he knew immediately that something was wrong. The valley was too quiet, and when he cleared the gap into his little sanctuary, he saw 3 horses tied outside his cabin, steam rising from their flanks in the cold air. Benjamin dismounted in one smooth motion, his rifle in his hands, every sense on high alert. He moved toward the cabin with the silent grace of a hunter, circling to approach from an angle that would give him a view through the windows. What he saw made his blood run cold. Juniper was backed against the far wall of the main room, her pistol drawn but clearly outnumbered by the 3 men who faced her. One was tall and lean with a cruel face that Benjamin instantly knew must be Silas Corrigan. The other 2 were heavyset and armed, clearly hired muscle. "You have led me on quite a chase, girl," Corrigan was saying, his voice carrying through the thin window glass. 3 years of tracking you across half the territory, but it ends now. You are coming with me one way or another." "I would rather die," Juniper spat, and Benjamin felt pride surge through him at the strength in her voice despite the fear he knew she must be feeling. "That can be arranged," Corrigan said coldly. "Though it would be a waste. You are pretty enough and spirited. I could get good money for you down in Mexico. But if you insist on making this difficult, I will settle for the satisfaction of putting a bullet in you like I did your brother." Benjamin had heard enough. He moved to the door, kicked it open with enough force to tear it from one hinge, and entered with his rifle leveled. The element of surprise was complete. All 3 men spun toward him, but Benjamin was already firing. The first hired gun went down with a bullet in his shoulder before he could even raise his weapon. The second managed to get a shot off, but it went wide, and Benjamin's return fire hit him square in the chest. The man dropped like a stone. That left Silas Corrigan, who had grabbed Juniper in the chaos, his arm around her throat and his gun pressed to her temple. "Drop it," Corrigan snarled at Benjamin, or I will paint your walls with her brains." Benjamin froze, his rifle still leveled, his mind racing through scenarios. He could take the shot. He was good enough to do it, to hit Corrigan without hitting Juniper, but good enough was not certain enough, not when it was her life on the line. "Let her go," Benjamin said, his voice deadly calm. "This is between you and me now. You," Corrigan laughed harshly. "You are nobody. This is about a debt owed, about making an example." "The debt died with her father," Benjamin said, slowly lowering his rifle. "You know that. This is about your pride, about not being able to accept that a woman outsmarted you for 3 years. Let her go and prove you are actually the man you claim to be." Corrigan's eyes narrowed. "You think I am stupid. The moment I let her go, you will kill me." "Probably," Benjamin agreed, "but at least you will die with some dignity instead of cowering behind a woman." The taunt hit its mark. Corrigan's face flushed with anger, and his grip on Juniper loosened just slightly. It was enough. Juniper drove her elbow back into his stomach with all her strength, and as Corrigan doubled over, she dropped and rolled away. Benjamin's rifle cracked once, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Silas Corrigan fell backward, a red stain spreading across his chest, his gun clattering to the floor unfired. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by ragged breathing and the crackling of the fire. Then Juniper was on her feet and running to Benjamin, throwing herself into his arms with enough force to stagger him despite his size. "I have got you," Benjamin said, dropping his rifle to wrap his arms around her. "I have got you. You are safe now. It is over." Juniper was shaking, but not from fear, from relief, from the overwhelming realization that the nightmare that had defined 3 years of her life had just ended. Silas Corrigan was dead. The men who had hunted her were dead or would not be bothering anyone for a long time. It was truly over. "How did you know to come back?" she asked, her face pressed against Benjamin's chest. "I did not. But I had a bad feeling when I was in town, and I have learned to trust those feelings. So I finished my business as fast as I could and rode hard." He pulled back enough to look at her, his eyes scanning for injuries. "Did they hurt you?" "No. They arrived maybe an hour ago, tried the door, found it barred. I told them to leave, they refused. One of them tried to break down the door and I shot him through the window." "Not fatally," she added, glancing at the man Benjamin had hit in the shoulder, who was still breathing but unconscious. "After that, they got more serious, broke through the door, and were trying to decide what to do with me when you arrived." Benjamin looked around at the scene, at the bodies and the blood, and sighed heavily. "I suppose I need to go back to Steins Pass, report this to whatever law exists out here. Will you get in trouble?" "Doubtful." This was clearly self-defense, and if Corrigan is as wanted as I expect he is, there might even be a reward. Benjamin cupped her face in his hands. "But more importantly, are you all right? Really all right?" Juniper took a shaky breath, then nodded. "I am. I was terrified, but I was also ready. Everything you taught me, all those hours of practice, it kept me calm enough to think. And I knew you would come. I knew you would not leave me to face this alone." "Never," Benjamin said fiercely. "I will never leave you to face anything alone. We are in this together now for as long as you want me." "How about forever?" Juniper said, managing a watery smile. "That long enough for you?" Benjamin's answer was to kiss her, deep and passionate and full of promise. The aftermath was handled as cleanly as such things could be in the New Mexico Territory in 1879. Benjamin rode down to Steins Pass with the bodies and the surviving gunmen, who confessed everything in hopes of leniency. Turned out Silas Corrigan was wanted for murder and extortion in 3 territories, and there was indeed a reward, substantial enough that Juniper would never have to worry about money again. The circuit judge who eventually heard the case ruled it justified. self-defense against known criminals attempting kidnapping and murder. Benjamin and Juniper were cleared of any wrongdoing, though the story of the mountain man and the woman he had protected spread through the territory like wildfire. Through it all, Juniper felt like she was walking in a dream. The fear that had been her constant companion for 3 years was gone, truly gone. Silas Corrigan was dead. The men who had hunted her were either dead or in custody. She was free. The weight of it, the sheer relief, sometimes overwhelmed her. But Benjamin was there, solid and steady, anchoring her through the emotional storms that followed. He held her when she woke crying from nightmares about her brother. He listened when she needed to talk about her father, about the guilt she felt for surviving when they had not. He reminded her, again and again, that she was strong, that she was brave, that she deserved peace and happiness. Spring came to the mountains, melting the snow and filling the valley with wildflowers. Juniper watched it happen from the porch of the cabin, which was now truly her home, and felt something shift in her chest. Not healing exactly. The scars would always be there. But acceptance. The ability to remember without being destroyed by the memories. One morning in late April, as she was collecting eggs from the chicken coop, Benjamin approached with something clearly on his mind. He was nervous, which was unusual for a man who faced down danger with such calm certainty. "Juniper," he began, then paused, running a hand through his long hair. "I have been thinking." "That is always dangerous," she teased gently. Benjamin smiled despite his nervousness. "I built this place as a refuge for myself, a place to hide from the world and the things I had done. But with you here, it has become something else. A real home. The kind I never thought I would have." Juniper set down her basket of eggs, giving him her full attention. "I feel the same way. I know we have not known each other that long in the grand scheme of things, only about 6 months. But they have been the best 6 months of my life, and I cannot imagine going back to the way things were before. I do not want to imagine it." He took a breath, then dropped to one knee in the dirt of the chicken yard, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. "Juniper Reeves, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life protecting you, loving you, building something good with you?" Juniper's hands flew to her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. "Yes," she said, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." Benjamin stood, sweeping her up in his arms and spinning her around, both of them laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, he slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly. "Where did you get this?" she asked, admiring the simple band. "Made it," Benjamin admitted. "Melted down some gold I had, shaped it in the forge I keep in the barn. I wanted it to be from me, made with my hands, not something bought in a store." Juniper kissed him deeply, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into it. "It is perfect. You are perfect." "Far from it," Benjamin said with a laugh. "But I will spend every day trying to be the man you deserve." They were married in June by the same circuit judge who had cleared them, with Mrs. Carleton and Mrs. Henderson as witnesses, in a simple ceremony in Steins Pass. Juniper wore a dress she had sewn herself from white fabric Benjamin had brought back from a supply run, and Benjamin wore the shirt she had made him for Christmas. They spoke their vows on the porch of the boarding house where they had first met, and when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Benjamin kissed her with such tenderness that several of the assembled women wiped away tears. The reception was small but joyful, with food and music and dancing in the street. For a few hours, Juniper and Benjamin were just another happy couple celebrating their union, not the mountain man and the woman he had saved. They were simply two people who had found each other against all odds and chosen to build a life together. As the sun set, and they prepared to ride back up to their mountain sanctuary, now as husband and wife, Mrs. Carleton pulled Juniper aside. "You found a good man there," she said kindly. "One who will stand by you through anything." "I know," Juniper said, watching Benjamin secure their supplies on the horses. "I still cannot believe how lucky I am." "Not luck," Mrs. Carlton corrected. "You survived, you fought. You made it to a place where someone could help. That was not luck. That was strength. And Benjamin saw that strength and recognized it because he has it too. You two are well matched." Juniper hugged the older woman impulsively. "Thank you for sending him to me that day. Thank you for seeing that I needed help." "My pleasure, dear girl. Now go on, get back to your mountain. Build your life. Be happy. You have certainly earned it." The years that followed were the happiest Juniper had ever known. She and Benjamin settled into their life together with an ease that felt natural, as if they had been made to fit each other. They worked side by side, maintaining their homestead, expanding the garden, improving the cabin. They spent long evenings by the fire reading or talking or simply sitting in comfortable silence. They made love with passion and tenderness, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal devotion. And Juniper slept, every night deeply and peacefully, with Benjamin beside her or standing watch over her. The nightmares faded over time, replaced by dreams of the future they were building together. In the spring of 1880, Juniper discovered she was pregnant. Benjamin's reaction was everything she could have hoped for: joy and excitement and tender protectiveness that somehow managed to increase even beyond what it already was. He fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more, work less, eat more nutritious food. Juniper tolerated his hovering with amused patience, knowing it came from love. Their son was born in October of that year, during the first snowfall of the season. The birth was difficult, and there were moments when Benjamin feared he would lose them both. But Juniper fought through it with the same fierce strength she had shown in everything else. And when the baby's cries finally filled the cabin, Benjamin wept with relief. They named him Thomas, after Juniper's brother who had died defending his family. Thomas Reeves Grant, a bridge between the past and the future. Benjamin was a devoted father, gentle with the tiny infant despite his massive hands, singing old songs in his deep voice to soothe the baby when he cried. Watching him cradle their son, Juniper felt her heart swell with love so profound it sometimes frightened her. 2 years later, they had a daughter, who they named Sarah. She had her mother's green eyes and her father's steady temperament, and she completed their family in a way that felt perfect. The children grew up wild and free in the mountain valley, learning to track and hunt and live off the land from their father, learning to read and write and think critically from their mother. Benjamin built additions onto the cabin to accommodate their growing family, and the little valley rang with laughter and life in a way it never had when he lived there alone. Juniper sometimes thought about the woman she had been when she stumbled into Steins Pass 7 years earlier, exhausted and terrified and unable to close her eyes fully. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from another life. She had been broken and lost, certain she would never be safe again. But Benjamin had shown her that safety was not just about physical protection, though he certainly provided that. It was about trust, about knowing someone would stand between you and danger without hesitation, about having a partner who saw your strength even when you felt weak, who believed in you even when you doubted yourself. One evening in the summer of 1885, as they sat on the porch watching Thomas and Sarah play in the yard, Benjamin took Juniper's hand in his. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "This life, being isolated up here instead of living in a town where you would have neighbors and society." Juniper looked at him in surprise. "Never, not for a single moment." "This," she gestured to their children, their home, the mountains around them. This is everything I never knew I wanted. You gave me safety when I thought I would never feel safe again. You gave me love when I thought I was too broken to deserve it. You gave me a family and a future. How could I possibly regret that? Benjamin smiled, that soft smile that was reserved only for her. I just want to make sure you are happy. That is all I have ever wanted. I am more than happy, Juniper said firmly. I am at peace. For the first time in my life, I am completely at peace. And that is because of you, Benjamin Grant. Because you saw someone in desperate need and did not look away. Because you stood guard so I could finally sleep. Because you loved me when I could not love myself. Benjamin pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every moment, every decision that led me to you. You and these children are the best thing that ever happened to me. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Juniper Reeves Grant rested her head on her husband's broad shoulder and watched their children play. She thought about the long road that had led her here, the pain and fear and loss that had marked her journey. Those things had shaped her, but they did not define her anymore. Now she was defined by love, by family, by the mountain man who had watched over her so she could finally close her eyes and sleep deep, and in that sleeping, find the strength to wake up and truly live. The years continued to pass in their mountain sanctuary, each season bringing its own rhythms and challenges. Thomas grew into a strong, thoughtful boy who had inherited his father's skill with weapons and tracking, along with his mother's sharp intelligence. Sarah was bold and adventurous, constantly testing boundaries and keeping her parents on their toes. Benjamin and Juniper raised their children with care, teaching them not just survival skills, but also compassion and justice. They told them stories of their pasts, age-appropriate versions that emphasized the importance of standing up for what was right and protecting those who could not protect themselves. As the children grew older and more independent, Benjamin and Juniper found themselves with moments of quiet together again, reminiscent of their first winter in the cabin. They would sit by the fire after the children were asleep, talking about everything and nothing, planning for the future, remembering the past. "You ever think about going back?" Benjamin asked one night. "To see if any of your father's family is still around to visit your brother's grave?" Juniper was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes, but this is my family now, you and Thomas and Sarah. My father and brother would want me to be happy, to be safe. They would be glad I found you. Maybe when the children are older we could take a trip," Benjamin suggested. "Visit the places you came from, put some ghosts to rest properly." "Maybe," Juniper agreed, "but I am in no hurry. Everything I need is right here." By 1890, Thomas was 10 years old and Sarah was 8, both growing like weeds in the mountain air. They were homeschooled by Juniper, who had been well educated before her life fell apart and was determined her children would have the same advantages. Benjamin supplemented their education with practical skills, teaching them to ride, shoot, fish, trap, and survive in the wilderness. The family made trips down to Steins Pass a few times a year, and the children loved these excursions, eager to see other people and experience the relative excitement of the small railroad town. Mrs. Carleton and Mrs. Henderson doted on them, always having treats ready when the Grant family arrived. Word had spread over the years about Benjamin and Juniper's story, romanticized and embellished in the telling. The mountain man who had saved a desperate woman from outlaws, who had stood guard so she could finally sleep safely, who had fought off her pursuers and won her heart. It had become something of a legend in the territory, and occasionally people would seek them out, asking if the stories were true. Benjamin and Juniper always politely declined to discuss the details, preferring their privacy and their quiet life. They were not interested in being legendary figures. They were simply two people who had found each other when they both desperately needed someone to understand them. As the children entered their teenage years, Benjamin began teaching Thomas more advanced skills, taking him on longer hunting trips and showing him the full extent of the territory he knew so well. Sarah, not to be left behind, insisted on joining these trips, and while Benjamin initially resisted, Juniper pointed out that their daughter deserved the same knowledge and skills as their son. "The world is dangerous for everyone," Juniper said firmly, "but especially for women. Sarah needs to know how to protect herself, how to survive. I wish I had known these things when I was her age. Maybe things would have gone differently." Benjamin agreed, and Sarah proved to be an apt student, fierce, and determined to master every skill her father could teach. She was in many ways a perfect blend of both her parents, strong and capable but also thoughtful and kind. The years of peace continued, blessed and ordinary. They faced the challenges that all families face: childhood illnesses, harsh winters, lean times, disagreements and reconciliations. But through it all, Benjamin and Juniper remained solid, their love deepening with each passing year rather than fading. They added to their homestead over time, building a larger barn, expanding the garden, even constructing a small guest cabin for when they had visitors, though those were rare. The valley became increasingly self-sufficient, a little kingdom of their own making, hidden away in the mountains. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1894, Benjamin took Juniper back to the spot on the eastern slope where he had first told her about his thinking place. They climbed the narrow path together, their bodies still strong and healthy despite the passage of years, and sat on the same flat boulder where they had sat so long ago. "You remember that day?" Benjamin asked, his arm around her shoulders as they looked out over the valley below. "Every moment," Juniper said. "I remember thinking I had never met anyone like you, that I did not know men like you existed. Men who drag women up mountains," Benjamin teased gently. "Men who see people for who they really are, not just what they can provide or what they look like. Men who keep their word. Men who stand between danger and the people they love without hesitation." Juniper leaned her head on his shoulder. "You were so patient with me, Benjamin, letting me heal in my own time, never pushing for more than I was ready to give. You were worth the wait." "Worth everything." Benjamin kissed the top of her head. "I was just an angry, isolated man before you came along. You gave my life meaning again." "We saved each other," Juniper said softly. "That is the truth of it. We were both lost and we found each other in that lostness." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun moved across the sky, the wind rustling through the pine trees, a hawk circling lazily overhead. It was perfect peace, hard-earned and deeply cherished. By 1898, Thomas was 18 and Sarah was 16, both nearly grown and beginning to think about their own futures. Thomas wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, living close to the land, perhaps finding his own piece of wilderness to call home. Sarah was more interested in the wider world, talking about perhaps becoming a teacher or even a nurse, wanting to help people the way her parents' story had inspired her. Benjamin and Juniper supported both their children's dreams, knowing that their purpose had been to raise them strong and capable enough to make their own choices. It was bittersweet, the approaching end of this chapter of their lives, but also deeply satisfying to see the adults their children were becoming. One evening, after a particularly lively family dinner where Sarah and Thomas had been debating the merits of city versus country living, Benjamin and Juniper retreated to their bedroom, the one place that was still just theirs. "They are going to leave us eventually," Juniper said quietly, sitting on the edge of the bed they had shared for nearly 2 decades. Go out into the world and build their own lives. I know, Benjamin said, pulling off his boots, but we raised them right. They will be fine. Better than fine. I am going to miss them terribly. Benjamin moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. Me too, but we will still have each other, just like we started. You and me against the world, or in our case, very happily removed from the world. Juniper smiled, leaning against his solid warmth. I can think of worse fates. So can I. In fact, I have lived worse fates. This right here, this is everything I never knew I needed. They lay back together on the bed, fully clothed but intimately close, wrapped in each other's arms. And as Juniper closed her eyes, preparing to drift into the deep, restful sleep that Benjamin's presence still guaranteed after all these years, she felt profoundly grateful. Grateful for that desperate day in 1878 when she stumbled into Steins Pass, more dead than alive. Grateful for Mrs. Carleton's kindness in sending Benjamin to her. Grateful for Benjamin's unwavering strength and patience and love. Grateful for the children they had raised and the life they had built. Most of all, grateful that she had finally, after so many years of fear and running, found the one place and the one person where she could close her eyes fully and sleep deep, knowing she was safe, knowing she was loved, knowing she was home. Benjamin held her as she slept, his hand moving gently through her hair, and he thought about the scared, exhausted woman who had walked into that boarding house nearly 20 years ago. The woman who flinched at every sound and never let down her guard. The woman who had captured his heart with her fierce determination to survive despite everything the world had thrown at her. She was still fierce, his Juniper, still strong. But now that strength came from a place of peace rather than desperation. She had healed, truly healed, and he was honored to have been part of that healing. The years ahead would bring their own challenges, Benjamin knew. Children leaving home, aging bodies, the uncertainties of life. But they would face all of it together, just as they had faced everything else. Two people who understood what it meant to be broken, who had put each other back together piece by piece, who had built something beautiful from the fragments of their shattered pasts. As night settled over their mountain valley, Benjamin Grant kept watch over his sleeping wife, just as he had on that first night so many years ago, and just as he would for all the nights to come. It was his purpose, his privilege, his joy. To stand guard so Juniper Reeves Grant could sleep deep and dream peacefully, safe in the knowledge that nothing in this world would ever threaten her again while he still drew breath. And in the morning, they would wake together, face another day together, continue building their life together. It was enough. It was everything. It was the happily ever after neither of them had believed possible, earned through courage and trust, and the simple, powerful act of two people choosing to love each other despite every reason not to. The mountain man and the woman who could finally close her eyes. Their story had a beginning marked by fear and desperation, but it had found its way to something far better. A middle and an eventual end characterized by love, safety, family, and the deep peace that comes from finding exactly where you are meant to be, and exactly who you are meant to be with, in this beautiful, terrible, wonderful world.